My name is Mikael Järpenge. I'm a channel SE in the Nordics and the Benelux region for Proofpoint. And I'm going to be your presenter today of people-centric security and why there is a need for having a slightly different shift on how we approach and look at security in the modern world. So that is my introduction, and please let me know when I can speak. World, how we used to be working and so on. We had a very network-centric and very closed type of environment, because if we look at today's world where we start using more and more applications that are run from other places, such cloud-based services or running in other data centers, but also if we look at the concept of how we work from a personal perspective. We might be working from home and we might not be even in an office and so on. So we have slightly different challenges today. And one thing that became very evident of that was that last year in 2020, people became the perimeter. So people became the security perimeter. And why do I say that? Well, obviously because most of us already know about the pandemic that has happened. And this posed a challenge for many organizations because you couldn't have people collected together in an office, as an example. You couldn't have meetings face to face and so on because people were forced to work from home. And increasingly, we started shifting over to have meetings like we have the webinar today over Zoom or Teams or WebEx or whatever application that you were using. And that posed a different challenge for many organizations because when we look at how people work and how they access data and so on, there are different types of challenges, especially when we talk about the cloud. One of the reasons for that, if you have a network-centric focus where you are very good at protecting your network perimeter and so on, many of these threats are not traversing your. You need to have a slightly different focus. And one of the key things in security today is to have visibility. And those of you that watched the presentation from Palo Alto before me, you also noticed that they had the same opinion about this. Visibility is key. When we talk about visibility, we can do visibility in various different ways. And there are some things that we need to take into consideration, and I will move through them in a few slides. But first of all, I will also pitch back a little bit here, because if we look at, as an example, Office 365, which is one of the, we like to think of it as an enabler for many of these attacks today. And why do I say that? We can base it on some statistics that we have seen, all the data that we have collected over the years and so on, and are still, seeing based on email threats and so on. But the main point here is actually that a lot of attacks and malicious files and so on are actually hosted on SharePoint or OneDrive. This is not only SharePoint and OneDrive, but this is the majority of them, because it's very easy to create accounts and you can host a malicious file on there and there is no one that is actually looking at it. So when you send an email then with a link that points towards this SharePoint hosted file or OneDrive hosted file, there is a great chance that if you don't have that visibility and if you don't have the necessary capabilities to detect that, there is a great risk that you will actually receive this threat into your into the user's mailbox. So we know that the attackers that are attacking the organizations, they have been focusing on the people for quite some time now. But still, most of the defenders, and when I say defenders, that is all us in the whatever organization or company you're working in, how we have been protecting the environment and the organization has been very focused towards the network and the network perimeter, and also on the endpoint. We can see that by how the amount of money that we spend on different types of security measures. We see that only about 10% of the security investments are related to email security, but we still see that the majority of all attacks actually happens over the email channel. And when we say the email channel, what does that mean? Well, email, we can look at it from two different perspectives. We can look at it from a technical perspective, like a communication tool, but what does it mean ultimately in the end? Well, there is someone typing an email and there is someone responding to an email and so on. So this is an attack towards the user. It is an attack towards the users, because when you start spoofing and so on and trying to launch an attack to someone in an organization, it's directed towards the users, because that user then becomes that vulnerable point where they can most easily get access into the organization. So this is why I say that this requires a new type of security architecture. So obviously we need to secure the perimeter still, because we need to secure some internal resources and so on. But we definitely need to look more at securing the people, direct the security towards the users in the organizations, and gain visibility into that. So when we talk about getting visibility, it's all about building a people-centric platform. So first of all, we can look at from the threat perspective, protecting the users from those attacks that happens and protecting them from the threats. But also we need to look at things like what are the users doing with the data that they create and access and so on. Secondly, the other part, the more soft part of this, is user education, because we know there are many reports on this that we know that users many times don't know what different types of threats and techniques actually means, what they are and how they actually are being used, directed towards those users. So we need to do security awareness training for all those users as well. And when we talk about security awareness training, that doesn't mean that we are just sending out some simulated phishing emails, because this covers a lot more. It covers how do we handle PII data, how do we handle company confidential data, or how do we handle data that we are not really sure of what it is. And that means, where do I put this data? Because we need to educate the users that these topics are important, because the users become that, we can call it a human firewall or something like that, but that's ultimately what happens. So if we combine these two pillars here, so we talk about the threat vectors and we talk about protecting the people and educating them, and then we combine that finally with the approach of protecting what people access and how they access things. So things like zero trust access, we have CASB to give visibility, but also making sure that the correct people are accessing the correct resources and so on. But also there is a very important thing here, and that is looking at inside threats, because not all threats are coming from the outside. Some of these threats are actually coming from the inside as well. So we need to gain a 360 view of the users and what is actually happening in the environment and what is coming in to the environment. And it's all directed towards the users to get context here. So one of the ways we can do this is if we look at it from a threat perspective through the email vector, we need to understand who are our VAPs, or the very attacked people, because we need to be able to prioritize also. Especially if we have large organizations, it's crucially important that we can actually be able to detect these very attacked people. So we do this in 3 different ways. We look at 3 different pillars, so to speak. So who is the one that is likely to fall for a threat? Well, that could be anyone that we can see that they are actually clicking on malicious content, or they are clicking on malicious links. Maybe they are failing security awareness training, or sometimes they don't even do that training. But it can also fall into the aspect of that they are using risky devices or cloud services and third-party applications, as an example, in their cloud environments, in their cloud accounts. That is someone that those people are the ones that become the vulnerable part. So the vulnerability aspect of the users, that is how we determine that. Second thing is we look at the attacks that are coming in. So all these attacks that are coming over the email channel, we look at the email gateway and through our sandboxing solutions, and get that context around that and see who is being most attacked and who is being attacked with the most sophisticated threats, and who are the threat actors that are actually attacking these users, to get a full visibility into that attack chain and see what it actually is. That allows us to calculate a risk score, which is vital for having that understanding and gaining that visibility into the organization of how to prioritize and see which are the users that we need to take more care of. And the final part of this is to understand, obviously, internally, who these users are, what kind of privilege levels do they have, what kind of access levels do they have, because that will be equally important to understand. Because if someone with a higher access level or a higher privilege or mandate is being attacked and is also vulnerable, that poses a greater risk for the organization as well. So then if we look at information protection, I mentioned that also we don't need to look at things as attacks, but we also need to look at this from a perspective of what data the users are actually creating and using and moving. Because obviously data doesn't move itself, or it doesn't lose itself. Someone has to do something with it. And we can break this down in 3 different areas. So we can look at this, that we have the different types of users that are accessing and using data in a malicious way. It could be the negligent user, and the negligent users, that is the most common part. They actually don't know that, oh, I shouldn't move this data there, or I shouldn't copy this to this file share, or using it in my cloud service or something like that. That is the negligent user, and obviously you take care of that by more training and putting some security controls in place as well. Then you have the compromised user. The compromised user is someone who has maybe fallen for an attack already before, so their account is now at a compromised state, which means that an attacker actually have access to their account and can move data based on the purposes that they have. And the final part is the malicious user. That is an internal employee that, or contractor, or for that matter as well, but someone who has been given access to the organization, but they are acting in a malicious way. They are stealing data, or they are trying to move data out of the organization and somewhere else. So this is the three pillars of users that we can really look into and give visibility into. And that how we do that is basically to make sure that we have the correct type of telemetry to understand and mitigate the user risks. So we need to be content aware to identify the sensitive or the regulated data. So we are not regulated data, we might end up in compliance issues and so on. With sensitive data, that might be more related to internal IP data, such as intellectual property and so on, or customer records, whatever it might be. And we do this obviously by many traditional means like data classification, labeling, tagging, and so on. We also need to understand that what are the intents of the users? What are the users actually doing? So we need to be able to identify the activity of the users and what are their intents and how did they access this data and what did they do with it? Did they just access it and then move, or did they actually do a certain number of steps, or they were taking some actions and trying to hide their tracks maybe? To get that behavior context is very, very important. And finally, we can also look at this from a threat perspective as well, because we need to look at the threat from the perspective of the user, that have their accounts been compromised right now? Have they been phished in a previous attempt maybe that was successful? This user actually clicked on a link, or they downloaded an attachment that shown that it was actually malicious in a previous thing. So gaining all this threat intelligence and insights across the cloud and email vector is very important in terms of protecting the users, and especially for the organization to mitigate the user risk. So what we do basically is that Proofpoint has a vast capability of doing this because we have so many different data points where we are collecting data. We are the #1 deployed solution on all the Fortune 100, Fortune 1000, Global 2000 and so on. But not only that, if we look at the number of customers that are using our solutions today, it's more than 150,000 customers. But we are also present on most of the world's largest ISPs. So we can see that we are analyzing from an email perspective. We see a lot of data every day, and we see all these threats coming in, and we can collect this data and apply different types of machine learning capabilities, but also AI and deep neural network kind of capabilities, where we apply this not only on the threats themselves, but we correlate all this, and so we can get an understanding for the conviction of this and see if this is good or bad. Because what we also see that there is a lot of threats where there are really no hard point to detect, like there are emails that are purely text-based and there is no malicious URLs or there are no malicious attachment in those emails, but we can still say that this is actually an attempt to fool someone into doing and tricking that person to doing something, maybe going to a malicious file share somewhere, things like that. So we apply all this intelligence that we have and apply the different detection technologies that we have in the back end to provide this kind of not only the detection to improve the detection efficacy, but also to provide the visibility for the organization. So the organization using the solution, they can actually apply this and get understanding for their organization, what is actually happening to my users, but does it also affect other ones in other organizations or other companies. So if I'm working in a particular vertical, let's say that I'm working in manufacturing as an example, we may not have been hit yet by this new threat that has come, but we can see that maybe there is some other companies that have been hit by this. We can then use that metadata to protect this organization from this as well. So this is obviously the need and benefit of this is of course quite obvious. But the most important thing about this is actually that the number of data points that we are collecting from and the amount of threat intelligence that we collect covers many different areas. So this is how to build out a people-centric threat and information protection platform. So that we're looking at the email vector, we're looking at the cloud vector, and we're building out the ecosystem. Also looking at what I mentioned, the information that people are using internally and so on, and how they are accessing that information. When we tie all these things together, we get a full context and a full understanding of what is actually happening to the organization. Where are my risks? Where are my vulnerabilities? Where are my vulnerable users? And what actions do I need to apply to this? Do I need to educate my users? Do I need to apply different kind of security controls, like adaptive security controls, where we have people that we know have been attacked? Can we, as an example, put them in a different security group to make sure that they get different access levels? Or maybe we need to enforce multi-factor authentication, or we might force them to do a password change and things like that. So we can scale out this system in different ways. And obviously, when I talk about building out an ecosystem in a people-centric platform, we also need to take into account that we are not alone in this. And the more we are that we can connect with and apply these next generation tools in the organization, and where we can utilize this information and take different actions based on what we see, we can obviously scale out and be even more efficient in our people-centric journey. So in key integrations, I'm showing just a few of them here on the slide. So we have integrations with Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, Okta, SailPoint, CyberArk, Splunk, but there are many more. So, but these are some of the ones that we are working with. And by that, I think I am at the end of my presentation. And I also hope that people will join in our virtual room, where I will be joining in a short moment. So back to the moderator.
Thank you, Mikael, for your presentation. It was interesting to listen. And as we don't have many time for questions, from my side would be one question for you. As we all understand, as you mentioned, people are the key risk for the organizations, and so how to raise the awareness about the cybersecurity? How do you think? How it would be possible to do that?
Well, obviously, one thing that we can do is that we can, depending on what capabilities we already have in the organization, but something that is very easily approachable is security awareness training. That's a very easy thing, and it's quite the barrier to actually incorporate such a tool in an organization is quite low, because most people understand that we need to have education, right? We need to train the users, and the best way of doing this is to have a type of platform that can cover all different vectors, right? So it's not only, as I mentioned, it's not only phishing simulation, right? We need to also be able to train in, it could be video-based training, it could be interactive-based, quiz-based training and so on, but also just enforcement in terms of, it could be infographics, things that are happening right now that we are seeing, just to make people aware of what is actually happening. So that is one way of at least starting the journey towards a people-centric platform. But we can also base it on real-world threats that we are seeing. I mean, on our email gateways and our CASB solutions and so on, we can detect these kind of things and provide that information back to the organization as well, because we give that full visibility.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation and for your answer.